The legend of Sleepy Hollow. Have you ever heard a story so spooky it made your hair stand on end? Get ready, because we're about to tell you a tale from a place called Sleepy Hollow, where legends come alive. Sleepy Hollow is a very old and quiet village. It's a place where the trees whisper secrets and the wind carries strange stories. People say Sleepy Hollow is filled with ghosts and goblins. It's a place where anything can happen, especially when the moon is full. Our story is about a man named Ichabod Crane. He was tall and thin and a little bit clumsy. He was also the new schoolmaster in Sleepy Hollow. Ichabod Crane arrived in Sleepy Hollow with all his worldly possessions crammed into a rickety little cart, pulled by a horse that looked as thin and hungry as he was. Books and papers overflowed from the cart, evidence of his scholarly pursuits, while a collection of strange, knobbly objects suggested a man who collected anything that caught his fancy. He was ready to teach the children of Sleepy Hollow, eager to impart his vast, if somewhat peculiar, knowledge, and just as eager to learn all the spooky stories and local legends the village had to offer. He imagined himself a great scholar, a master of knowledge, and was ready to make his mark on the sleepy little valley. He was also hoping to find a warm place to sleep and a large meal. He taught reading, writing, and arithmetic with a mix of enthusiasm and sternness, sometimes pausing mid-sentence to gaze out the window at a rustling leaf or a passing cloud. The children, a mix of wide-eyed innocence and mischievous grins, found his lessons both entertaining and bewildering. He would often break into long, dramatic recitations of poetry or draw elaborate diagrams on the chalkboard that seemed to have little to do with the lesson at hand. But it wasn't just the lessons that fascinated him. He also loved hearing the spooky stories the villagers told, tales of ghosts, goblins, and headless horsemen. He'd sit by the fire, his long neck craned forward, his eyes wide with fascination, as the villagers spun their yarns. He'd ask endless questions, trying to unravel the mysteries, and would often jump out of his skin at the slightest sound. He would also try to tell his own stories, which were often very long and not very scary. Ichabod was very superstitious, believing in ghosts, goblins, witches, and all sorts of strange creatures that went bump in the night. Sleepy Hollow, with its eerie atmosphere and rich folklore, was the perfect place for him. He saw omens in every shadow, heard whispers in every breeze, and found hidden meanings in every rustle of leaves. He believed that the world was filled with unseen forces, both good and evil, and that Sleepy Hollow was a place where these forces were particularly strong. He was constantly on the lookout for signs of the supernatural, and would often invent his own signs when he couldn't find any. He even carried a lucky rabbit's foot, a horseshoe, and a bag of garlic to ward off evil spirits. He was sure that any noise in the night was a ghost. The eerie atmosphere of Sleepy Hollow made Ichabod both scared and excited, like a child at a haunted house. Every creak of a branch, every hoot of an owl, and every rustle of leaves made him jump, his long limbs flailing in surprise. He'd imagined ghosts lurking behind every tree, goblins peeking from behind every rock, and the Headless Horseman galloping through the woods. He'd clutch his lucky charms, his heart pounding like a drum, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. He'd often run back to his small cottage and hide under the covers until the morning light. Yet, despite his fear, he couldn't resist the allure of the spooky stories and the thrill of the unknown. He was drawn to the mysteries of Sleepy Hollow like a moth to a flame, even though he knew he might get burned. Katrina Van Tassel was the prettiest girl in Sleepy Hollow, and her family was very rich. Ichabod was completely smitten with Katrina. He dreamed of marrying her and living a comfortable life. But Ichabod wasn't the only one who liked Katrina. There was also Brom Bones, a strong and mischievous young man. Brom was always playing pranks on Ichabod. He wanted to scare him away from Katrina. Their rivalry was the talk of the town. The most famous story in Sleepy Hollow was about the Headless Horseman. He was a soldier who lost his head in battle. People said the Headless Horseman roamed the countryside at night. He was searching for his lost head. The villagers told stories about seeing the Headless Horseman riding through the woods. These stories made Ichabod very nervous. Ichabod was both terrified and fascinated by the legend. He couldn't stop thinking about the Headless Horseman. One night, the Van Tassels had a big party. Everyone in Sleepy Hollow was invited, including Ichabod and Brom. Ichabod tried his best to impress Katrina at the party. He danced, he told jokes, and he tried to be charming. But Brom was always there, ready to spoil Ichabod's plans. He made fun of him and tried to make him look foolish. At the end of the night, Ichabod left the party feeling sad and disappointed. He had a long, dark ride home ahead of him. As Ichabod rode through the woods, the trees seemed to whisper his name. The shadows danced around him, making him jumpy. He started to imagine the Headless Horseman lurking in the darkness. Every sound made his heart beat faster. Suddenly, he heard the sound of hooves behind him. He turned around and saw a dark figure on a horse. It was the Headless Horseman. He was holding a pumpkin in his hand instead of his head. Ichabod was terrified. He kicked his horse and rode as fast as he could. The Headless Horseman was right behind him. The chase was on. Ichabod dodged trees and jumped over logs. He was desperate to escape the Headless Horseman. Ichabod raced towards the old wooden bridge. His horse, Gunpowder, galloping wildly, hooves pounding against the earth like thunder. He clung to Gunpowder's neck, his heart hammering against his ribs, his eyes wide with terror. He knew the legend, the whispered tales of the Headless Horseman's inability to cross the bridge, a sanctuary from the spectral rider. He urged Gunpowder onward, his voice a desperate plea, a frantic whisper lost in the wind. The Headless Horseman was close behind, a dark, menacing figure on a powerful steed, his pumpkin head glowing with an eerie orange light, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched and twisted across the path. The sound of the horseman's hooves echoed through the night, a relentless rhythm that grew louder with every passing moment, a chilling symphony of dread. Ichabod's breath hitched in his throat, a sob of fear escaping his lips. He was so close, so very close, yet the bridge seemed to stretch endlessly before him, a distant beacon in the darkness. But as he reached the center of the bridge, a terrible sight unfolded. The Headless Horseman reared his steed and with a mighty heave hurled the glowing pumpkin at Ichabod. The pumpkin, a grotesque substitute for a head, spun through the air, a fiery projectile aimed directly at the terrified schoolmaster. The impact was sudden and violent, a blinding flash of orange light followed by a sickening thud. Ichabod was thrown from Gunpowder's back, his body tumbling through the air, a ragdoll tossed by an unseen hand. The pumpkin shattered upon impact, its pieces scattering across the bridge like fiery shards, leaving behind a lingering smell of burnt pumpkin and fear. Gunpowder, startled and terrified, reared up and bolted, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Ichabod alone on the bridge, or so it seemed. A strange silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the gentle lapping of the river below. The next morning, the villagers of Sleepy Hollow ventured out, their faces pale, their voices hushed. They found Ichabod's hat, crushed and torn, lying near the bridge. Scattered around it were the remnants of the shattered pumpkin, its pieces a grim reminder of the night's events. But Ichabod himself was nowhere to be found. He had vanished, disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only the remnants of his terrifying encounter. Some people said the Headless Horseman had finally claimed his prize, carrying Ichabod away to his ghostly realm. Others whispered that Brom Bones, with his mischievous grin and his love of pranks, had played a clever trick, scaring Ichabod away from Katrina and Sleepy Hollow forever. Still others wondered if Ichabod had simply run away, his superstitious mind finally overwhelmed by the legends and lore of the village. No one ever knew for sure what happened to Ichabod Crane. The mystery of his disappearance remained a chilling legend in Sleepy Hollow, a tale whispered around campfires and passed down through generations. The old wooden bridge, shrouded in mist and mystery, stood as a silent testament to the night's events, a reminder of the enduring power of fear and the lingering shadows of the unknown.